Child Hub that helps us organize a series of webinars. Most of them, or all of them, have been recorded so far, and this one will also be recorded. So if you are interested, we will write in the chat box website that you can go to and listen to all our webinars, but also to access some of our tools. So my name is Olivia Lind Haldorsson, and I work with the Council of the Baltic Sea States as head of the Children at Risk Unit. And my co-speaker and co-author of the child participation tool that we will introduce here today is Turid Heiberg, and she will take a moment to introduce herself in a brief moment. And like Vesna, I am not in my office, and I also rely on Wi-Fi. So I will leave you with a little photograph of me, so at least you can see my face while I present, but turn off my camera. So, why a child participation tool? Well, this tool is an output of the Promise project, and the Promise project promotes multidisciplinary and interagency services under one roof for child victims and witnesses of violence. And we in particular promote the Barnahus model. And on this slide here, you can see a house which shows the 4 rooms that we often use to describe what the Barnahus is. So these are services that gather under one roof. And as you will see, the child will have access to the medical examination and interventions. The child will have their forensic interviews in the Barnahus. There is an opportunity for therapeutic assessment and interventions. And we also have social workers in charge of the child protection and social welfare. So this means that the child comes to one place and meets all of the professionals that they need to see if they have been or are suspected victims or witnesses of violence. And the Promise project has worked hard together with its partner. It is led by the CBSS with the support of Child Circle, and we have now since 2015 worked together to promote this model and to work towards our vision, which is a Europe where the human rights of children to protection from violence, to support, and to be heard are fulfilled. And this means that the voices of children are central to our work. And this is beyond facilitating a child-friendly forensic interview and interventions in the best interests of the child to prevent re-traumatization and traumatization. We also want to make sure that the models and standards that we promote take into account children's perspectives on Barnahus and their experiences with the services that they have been offered there. And this gave rise to the idea of a child participation tool, which would then help services and us to gather children's views on their experiences in Barnahus. And our thoughts ended up in this tool that we are presenting to you here today. So I would like to start with a little poll on asking you if you already gather children's views on your services. There are many, many ways of doing this, and I see already now that some of you have indicated that you do gather children's views, and if you want to, we welcome you to use the chat box to explain a little bit or give us some hints of of how you do that, if it's through oral interviews or questionnaires or other tools. We're very curious to hear from you. But I also see that there are a few of you who do not gather children's views, but maybe are planning to do so. And we really hope that the tool can be an inspiration for those of you who do not gather children's views today. Maybe it'll inspire you to start to plan for that. And for those of you who already plan, you may be inspired by the guidance and the tool that we will go through here today. So if we move on, because that is exactly what we want the child participation tool to do. It is for inspiration, so that you can create your own framework for consulting with children on their experiences of your services. And the tool includes both a guidance and templates for questionnaires, which gather several different questions that we can ask children to find out more about what they thought about the Barnahus setup and the practice. And in the end, the key purpose of this is, of course, to ensure that there is a basis for reform of the practice and setup in Barnahus that is informed by children. And we also have constructed the child participation tool in a way that it can help you to see if you implement the Barnahus quality standards from a child's perspective. But there are a few limitations to the tool that I would like to mention. So, as I said, the questionnaires focus on children's experience with Barnahus, starting from the journey to Barnahus and ending with the return to the daycare, school, or the home. So the questionnaires don't gather children's views on their experience of the full process, from initial report or initial disclosure to a potential court hearing and the longer term follow-up. It is focused on the experience with Barnahus. Another thing that I want to point out in terms of limitations is that there should never, ever be a concern that gathering the views of children on their experiences might interfere with any of the ongoing investigations. So the questionnaires never collect case-specific or personal information. The closest to personal information that we get is that we provide the child with an opportunity to relate their age and, if they want to, their gender or gender identity. It's also really important to note that the questionnaires will not support an impact assessment. That is the impact that your service has had on, for instance, the recovery of the child. Nevertheless, we do think that some of the information and results that you collect can reveal some interesting information about the experience in Barnahus and how it affected the outcomes of the multidisciplinary response. For example, the short-term well-being and recovery of children. Saying this, it is important to know that that is not the primary purpose of this tool, but maybe an outcome of it. As you will see a bit later on, the questionnaires offers questions on the same areas, but adapted to younger and older children. And this is to ensure that all children who wish to provide feedback have access to questionnaires that empower and support them to express their views regardless of the age that they are in. And we will come back to this because it is important to understand that these age groups are not set in stone and that we have to understand more about the individual child before we hand out any of the questionnaires. But those are some of the limitations that I think are important to point out at the very beginning. So the child participation tool is inspired by research, and it's informed by the work and the expertise from professionals who work in Barnahus or similar services from across Europe, but also in the US. And it, of course, draws on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, a series of Council of Europe law and guidance, and the Barnahus quality standards, which were developed during the first phase of the Promise project. And we will come back and look a bit closer at the standard, but just to say now that we have standards in the Barnahus quality standards that focus specifically on children's rights to be heard and receive information, but also child participation is embedded as a key concern in some of the other standards, such as the one on medical examination and therapeutic services. So with this introduction, I would like to hand over to Turid, who will speak more about the children's rights to participation, to be heard and receive information. That is is the foundation for this tool. And she will also talk a little bit about what we know from children already now and our consultations. And then after that, I will come back and go into a more technical presentation of the tool itself. So I hand over to you, Turid.
Ah, there I am. So, hello everyone. I'm Turid. As you know, I used to work in CBSS, but now I'm working as an independent human rights expert or consultant, and also still an expert to the Promise project. As Olivia said in the beginning, and as most of you know, the Barnahus model offers child victims and witnesses to violence a child-friendly, safe and professional environment to disclose the situation, which is fundamental to the criminal investigation, the judicial process, and the follow-up of the child. Thus, children's participation and testimony are core to the Barnahus process. And as Olivia also slightly mentioned, we have quite long experience in ensuring a safe and child-friendly environment in Barnahus and making the forensic interview as professional as possible, giving the child the better opportunity to tell their story without interfering adults. However, we have much less experience in collecting the views and reflections from children who are going through the Barnahus process about the process as such. The good thing is that at the moment there are several initiatives ongoing, and the Promise child participation tool is also one example of this. The child's right to be heard and be given appropriate information is a legal obligation that derives from the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child from 1989. And the good thing is also that almost all countries in the world have signed up to this convention. So although it took a long time for the world community to get this specific legal instrument to support children's rights to be protected against violence and the right to be included as citizens, participants, and contributors to societies, it is happening ongoing. Children's rights to be heard and participate and receive information were thus new concepts in 1989. And it implied a totally new culture, which was to listen to the child. But even now, we are celebrating 30 years of the UN Convention this year. Still, it is a challenge for children to be appropriately included in the society and in the family. And again, happily, we see that all the small initiatives that have been taken since '89 and also before that now is culminating in children and young people increasingly coming to the forefront by themselves. We see it in this environment campaigns going on globally. We know about it from the school situation, where children have demanded to be much more represented in the boards and in also in local elections, and also including in state election at local level. And the age level is going down many places. It's not only the CRC, the convention, but also other legal instruments have been developed to strengthen or enforce and be more specific. We can mention Lanzarote Convention, very important from the Council of Europe. Council of Europe has also developed the child-friendly justice guidelines, and they also have developed a child participation tool, more general child participation tool that have been tested in many European countries. So that is a very solid ground from where everything can grow. Another thing to notice is the development from 1989 when developing different kind of measures. In the beginning, it was overwhelmingly developed by adults, how child participation should be. And in those days, we used to call it tokenism. The young people called it tokenism, that they were used. But increasingly, societies have learned, and increasingly, children and young people are co-creators and co-creating, being part of research teams and evaluating results. So increased influence and participation by children in the Barnahus process, beyond taking part in the forensic interview, as this is an opportunity for them, very strong opportunity to voice their broader concerns, get support, and find new ground to base their lives upon. Participation means for children and young people, just like it means for adults, exercising influence over our lives and having enough information to make informed decisions. So beyond being a right, participation leads to better decision making. We are all involved, and to a more relevant and inclusive Barnahus, if Barnahus are able to also include the views and recommendation of children and young people. And with this new promised tool, it is a hope that more and more Barnahus will take the steps to increase the feedback from children and young people who have been through the process. And with time, one could also envision that these young people who have been through Barnahus becomes part of a broader movement against violence or for a violence-free society in all its form, and to the benefit of everyone. So this was a little bit about the background of the tool and the right as such that the young people and children have, those under 18. In addition, we know now that some Barnahus, they have collected reflections from children, and they do it ongoing. Mostly it's a quite simple way they collect this information, but like if they are happy or not by being in Barnahus. But we also have research, quite a lot of research has taken place where some children have been interviewed. And another example is from the Change Factory, Forandringsfabrikken in Norway, where close to nearly up to 200 children, young people who have been through the process have given their recommendations. And if we look into it, what they have recommended is, first of all, that children want to be informed from a very early age about the different forms of abuse that can happen in their life and how to report it. Secondly, children and young people are very strong that parents need mandatory education and information as to how to perform positive parenting and how to enable child participation at home and when children are making their own life choices. Then there are a certain issue they emphasize over and over again, and that is about trust. If the child cannot trust that if they talk about something happening, some violence happening in their life, if they cannot trust that this information will be taken seriously and that it will not be shared in an inappropriate way with others, but mostly in consultation with the child, they will not disclose. So trust is of utmost importance for children to disclose, and we adults have to rethink ways where we can be seen as a trusted adult. And of course, children want to know, they want to get relevant information before coming to Barnahus and at all the stages in Barnahus, and including after Barnahus. Who can they turn to if they have more questions, things coming up, and so on? That is like for children, like with everybody else, we need, when we take up serious matters, we need to have somebody we can trust to follow up, or at least who we can ask for how to follow up. Children also, of course, want to know who is listening in to the forensic interview and how the recordings will be handled. Another, in addition to trust and information, caring staff at Barnahus is, or not only at Barnahus, but those accompanying the child to Barnahus and after, to have caring adults is also underlined as one extremely important issue. Some children reported that some of those they met in this process where they probably tried to be as neutral and professional as possible, but still they need to have ways, professional ways of being, showing caring when the child cries or talks about something very hurtful. They are also very strong in many countries. The child still have to meet up in court. How to make the court process as child-friendly as possible. For instance, by the judge coming and talking with the child before the procedure. And of course, the child is not to meet the accused perpetrator. If I should sum it up, is that children need to feel involved, they need to feel in control, and they need to feel safe. And at any cost, we have to avoid re-traumatizing to happen during a procedure that we have invented to support children. So Thank you. And I turn back to Olivia, please.
Very much, Turid. And in order to meet some of the concerns that children have already spoken about, and also to make sure that child participation itself is safe, ethical, and meaningful, both for the child, of course, but also the Barnahus, so that actionable information can be retrieved. It's really important to carefully consider the methodology and format that you use to hear children's views. And as I said earlier, the guidance and the questionnaire templates are for inspiration. But we recommend strongly that you and the services who want to use this material carefully plan how they will use the templates, and that some time is taken to discuss a few issues that will help adapt this whole process to the specific context and the individual concerns that are at hand. And the guidance speaks about some of these issues, but it's important also to note that the issues that we have listed in the guidance are just a few of the things that we feel that it's important to consider. Your specific context or the specific child that you want to consult with may actually raise other concerns and considerations that you will have to take into account. But if we just quickly go through some of these issues, beginning with the format, there are of course many different ways that you can distribute and collect the questionnaires in the guidance. And it's really important to consider what you feel will be the best format to promote and to facilitate a broad participation, so that you also reach groups who may be cautious about sharing their views. Would that be handing out a paper questionnaire? Is it to hold an oral interviews? Can you use electronic means? Is there an app that you could use? And if possible, are there different practical tools that you can use to encourage children to reply to the questionnaire, so that different preferences and needs are taken into account, and that a broad group of children are encouraged to respond and share their views? Age groups, I noted previously that the questionnaires are adapted to 2 age groups, youth, which we have identified as 13 to 18 years old, and children 8 to 12. And the questionnaires for children can be used for oral interviews with younger children, and they can also be adapted, for example, by providing space to make a drawing. But it's important to remember that these groups are indicative, and that every child's individual development, writing and language skills will have to be considered before you use one of the questionnaires. If we look at the type of questions, as you will see, the questionnaire provides different types of example questions, and that can be like Likert scale type questions, open questions, and in some cases multiple choice. And it's really important to think about the implications of using different types of questions. For example, an open question may require more guidance and oral interviews for some children. And in order to really ensure actionable feedback that you can use, it may be necessary to include follow-up questions, or at least provide opportunities to ask follow-up questions, which can give the child an opportunity to clarify why they have given a certain response. And you will see that throughout the questionnaires, we provide these questions. We ask a question where you can select an answer, but we ask the child to tell us why they felt in a specific way. And that is really because we feel that there needs to be a focus on providing information that you can act on. And of course, it's also important to consider if you need to adapt the questionnaires or the methodology that you use to meet specific needs of certain groups of children, for instance, with special needs or diverse language abilities that the children that you encounter may have. If we look at the timing and the methodology, the timing is something that we have discussed at length and continue to discuss with a lot of professionals. And the timing of when you administrate and hand out the questionnaires to the children can obviously have substantial impact on the results of the consultation. We know that feelings and perceptions can fluctuate over or change over time, and children may be sensitive to expectations of what might happen or what it will be, good or bad. So it's important to discuss the timing that you will use, including when you kind of recruit the child, when they complete the survey, and how much time is reasonable for each child to complete the survey. And it's also important to think about the location so that there's a quiet, safe, and neutral place for the child to complete the questionnaire. So if we look at the length and the number of the questionnaire, as you will see from this document, we provide several sample questions that cover quite a broad range of areas and activities in Barnahus. And some of the questionnaires are therefore very specific and therefore long. So it's important to discuss which questions really are essential to your service. Do you need all questions? Can you merge questionnaires? Is it enough to just use the shorter version? When is it helpful to use a longer specific version or parts of it rather than a shorter version? And the length and the number of questionnaires may also need to be adapted to meet the respondents' needs, development, and abilities. So you need to consider what's appropriate for each child. And the guidance goes in to some recommendations in this area, but it's really to give you some food for thought and take ownership of developing this process so that it is adapted to your specific context. Ethical considerations and follow-up. So it's really important that all children should be given equal opportunities to give their feedback on their experience, but only if they wish to share their views. Participation should always be voluntary. And it's also really important to ensure that those children who accept to answer your questionnaires are kept safe, that they're offered proper assistance and follow-up in the process of sharing their views on Barnahus. So we really encourage you to discuss any ethical issues that can arise in the context of seeking children's views. And that can be also include requirements by law and measures, procedures that exist already in your country to ensure, for instance, ethical issues in research. Other ethical issues may include safeguarding children, meaningful, informed participation, non-discrimination, cultural diversity, data protection, privacy, and obviously consent from both children and caregivers. In terms of follow-up, we feel that it's really important that you plan what will happen after the child has handed in the questionnaire and what that follow-up might be. So what happens immediately afterwards? What are the mechanisms for thanking the child, providing potential feedback? What kind of information does the child need after completing the questionnaire? For example, how can we inform them of what will happen to the questionnaire, who will read it, how the replies will be treated, and what their efforts to share their views might lead to. So we feel that it's important to leave enough time after the questionnaire has been completed to discuss the input, and especially if the child has given negative experiences, which is such a valuable source of information for us, and already to establish who will the contact person be if the child needs to follow up on issues in the questionnaire after their kind of formal response has been given. Finally, bias. And a lot of the actors that we consulted with pointed to potential biases, and that can obviously have a huge impact on the validity of the questionnaires and the usefulness of the result. And we therefore encourage you to explore what you think potential bias might be in kind of developing your own methodology and use of the question here. And the guidance provides some thoughts on this that I encourage you to look at. So I think this gives you a little bit of a flavor that there is a real need to make sure that there is a solid framework and preparation in place so that this process becomes fruitful for all. But we also know that there are challenges, and we are respectful of the challenges that many services encounter when they want to put child participation in these kind of consultations in place. And if we look at this poll, it gives a few of the issues that we have encountered from professionals, and we'd love to hear from you if these issues, or if there are other issues, prevent you from putting child participation in place. So I don't know, Vesna, if we can have the poll, please. There we go. So we hear sometimes that services don't have the resources to put in place these kind of consultations, that there may be restrictions in law and policy, that there can be concerns that the gathering of children's views at different stages may actually interfere with the investigation. Some state ethical reasons, such as when is it actually appropriate to ask children who have just had a forensic interview and a traumatic experience in terms of the violence that they have been exposed to. Is it appropriate to ask them to share their views? Some may have practical reasons. A lot, and I see here that there are a few of you that mention timing. When do we actually do this? When is the most helpful moment? And when do we actually have time to provide the child with the support that it involves to, give a safe and meaningful framework for the gathering of views? So it's interesting to see that you actually have ticked some of the things that we already have encountered, and we would love to hear more from you of how you, your thoughts about how this has prevented you, but also maybe ideas of how you have actually addressed some of these concerns, because they are shared, and that is something that we see throughout the Promise project, that many of the problems that we encounter, not only in terms of child participation, but in providing services in a Barnahus or similar services, the problems are similar. And I see here that Caitlin has said that there are a lot of concerns about the timing in particular, and maybe timing related to ethical concerns. So that is something that I hope that we can continue to have a conversation on, because I know that even the services who do gather information struggle with the exact timing linked to ethical concerns. So thank you very much for providing that feedback. So let's take a look at a few of the questionnaires. This here that you see on the screen is the kind of the introduction or recruitment script that can be used for youth. And as you see, we do not ask anything in this introduction that reveals specific case information, and that is very, very important to make sure, so that people don't feel that actually this process interferes or makes, for instance, the testimony of the child invalid. So if we continue, what I am going to do now is that I'm going to open a link to the child participation tool so that we can take a look at one of the questionnaires. And here you see the different areas that we cover. It's general and welcome and venue, social services, child protection, forensic interview, medical examination, therapeutic assessment, therapy, and we've also provided a short youth satisfaction questionnaire, which gathers some of the key questions that can be found in all of these questionnaires. But we also opted to go for the longer ones, because you may be in a phase where you really want to look closely at the medical examination. And during that phase, you perhaps want to have more detailed information about that. And then you might choose to only use the medical examination questionnaire with children during a certain period to get some feedback from that. But let's open this, and I hope that it works and that you can all see it. And if you don't, please let us know. And I would like for us to look at the general welcome questionnaires really briefly, and that starts on page 14. So I won't go through these questionnaires at any length or detail, simply because we don't have time, but I do want to show you a few things that are common to the questionnaires, and where we have thought about different challenges for children to respond to questions, but also in terms of getting actionable information and also ethical concerns. So this is a questionnaire that looks at the overall experience in Barnahus. So it looks at one of the key concerns that children have, that Turid also mentioned, that children need to feel safe and welcome. It's also part of our standards. So we ask if children were greeted and welcomed to the Barnahus when they arrived. If you get a yes here, that means that you have a good reception. If you get a lot of notes, you may want to consider how actually you welcome children to the Barnahus, because that first contact is very important to the rest of the process in Barnahus. And for all of the alternatives, we have either not sure or no opinion option where that is appropriate, so that children don't feel forced to say yes or no. Here you see the next one. Did you feel welcomed and cared for in Barnahus? Here you see an example of structuring a question that we use throughout. And that is that we give, using a Likert scale type, we give a spectrum of potential responses for the child, ranging from very positive, less positive to very too negative. And again, you see no opinion and not sure. But leaving it at this, it only gives you an answer if the child was happy or not. And that is good, because you will know that maybe you're doing things in a good way or in a bad way. But we also want to make sure that children get an opportunity to tell us what made them feel that way. And that is really where you will get the actionable information that will give you concrete examples of what you might want to change. So moving on and going down, you will see that there are questions about controlling the situation, feeling safe. There are questions about feeling respected, that they were listened to, if they had felt that the Barnahus was adapted to their special needs. There are questions about the venue and asking the children if the waiting room was okay, if it felt safe, if it was comfortable or not, if it felt unsafe. We ask about the things that children can do while waiting, and we also give them an opportunity to describe their overall experience at Barnahus. And then most of the questionnaires will also end with a few open questions. Like you see that there, what other things would you have liked to do while you were waiting? And all of the questionnaires end with a question. If there is something else you want to tell us before, during, or after your visit to Barnahus, let us know. So that is really the structure that we are using for all of the questionnaires, and you will see that if you look through the tool. I would also like to encourage you to look at one of the child questionnaires, because there we use a different format. But before we do that, I have a slide in the presentation, if you go back to it, which shows the short introduction and recruitment script for children, where the language has been adapted. And there you also have a recruitment script for an oral interview, which may be relevant when you speak to children that are young. And in some cases, I saw that there was a question if there were questionnaires for very young children. And I think that you could use these questions, but you will have to be very careful about how you express them and what kind of feedback you can expect from younger children. So if we go back to the actual tool and we scroll down to page 25, or is it maybe, sorry, it's probably even further down, because I thought we could look at, apologies, I have. So if you go to page 46, you will see the same questionnaire that we just looked at, but for children. And the questions remain the same. In some cases, they have been reformulated, but you will see here that we give them more age-appropriate ways of responding. And we have had positive feedback on the use of emojis for younger children. Many schools use this, for instance, for development talks, and children are used to these characters and understand how they express different emotions. I have seen at least one questionnaire where there's also been space for children to draw if they want to do that. It is also very common that for younger children that the questionnaire is filled out with the support of an adult who reads out the questions, obviously if the children can't read themselves. So here you see that there are the same options. Did you feel safe in Barnahus? 2 positive, 2 negative, and 1 not sure. Again, a follow-up question which prompts the child to explain to us what made the child feel in that particular way. Why did you? We don't use why questions, by the way, but it explains why the child responded mostly. And that gives you more actionable information. Again, if you continue to scroll down, you will see that there are similar questions on did you feel listened to in Barnahus? Did you feel welcomed and cared for? And at the end of the questionnaire, we also have open questions and the possibility for children to provide us with information that we may not have thought of. So we are coming to the end of this presentation, and I hope that this short tour of the questionnaire has been helpful for you in understanding a little bit where we came from, but also the concerns that we feel are important to take into consideration when planning child participation, and also has given you some food for thoughts on the type of questions that you can ask children to get a good basis for potential reform of your service, or just to find out if you are fulfilling the Barnahus quality standards. So thank you very much from my side, and I will hand over to Vesna.
Thank you very much, Olivia. You are perfect, just in time to finish in 1 hour. So great. It was really interesting and I would say useful webinar. I see a lot of people joined us and stay through all the time. I saw that there was a lot of questions and comments. I see that Turid is answering in the chat box, but also still inviting you to share experience and ask questions. We have 1 minute or 2 also till the end. And always, like always, we have short evaluation polls that I will share now with you. So please give us also a minute to give us feedback. Of course, it's always very useful for us to have comments on our work. Of course, yes. And always, like always, we are giving certificates to your emails. I will share an email if you want to receive it. Just write on it, and we will send it in a day or 2, of course. Let us see if there are any kind of comments still. Okay. I see that nobody's writing anymore. I think that all of people were asking questions and giving comments through the webinar. So I just want to thank you and for joining us today, all of you, and especially to you, Olivia, and to you, Turid, to give us such a great lecture for all of us here. Thank you very much. And have a nice day.
Thank you very much. And please don't hesitate to come back with us with comments and questions. We're here to support you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.